So a couple of updates on Diddy. Um, we have not fully confirmed this. We are hearing that Diddy is enrolled in a domestic violence and a drug treatment program, two separate ones, while behind bars.
No one in that courtroom was prepared for what unfolded, not the reporters crammed into every seat, not the fans who had camped outside since sunrise, and definitely not Diddy, who never saw it coming.
We got some information. We broke this story a couple hours ago. Diddy is behind bars, but he is enrolled in two classes in jail. A class for drug abuse and one for domestic violence.
Domestic violence. These are programs that are offered by the federal government in the prison system for inmates, and he is enrolled in both of these programs. He's also, we're told, in therapy separate from those two programs. And all of these things that he's doing, typically for one reason, to look good for the judge.
Well, it's important because sentencing comes up October 3rd. And Diddy, look, everything that I know tells me that he will get between 1 and 2 years. And I think it's going to be closer to 1. Prosecution is asking for 4. That's just not going to happen for a Mann Act violation. So if that's right, look, he wants to get the lowest he can get. And I think it's going to be between that 1 and 2 range. To get the 1, I think he's got to show the judge that he is taking his misdeeds seriously.
Right. And by the way, we know that even when the judge said that he was not going to let him out on bail pending sentencing, one of the things he mentioned was his violence. We've seen violence.
Exactly.
So he knows that this is an issue for the judge.
And the defense conceded it.
Right. So that's something he definitely has to address. And that's what he's doing with this program.
Charles, he doesn't have to address it, but he is addressing it. And, this might help him with regards to his sentence. Maybe the judge might sentence him to lesser time because he's working on himself.
But Jamie, you know what the complication here is that he's been found not guilty on the charges that relate to drug use and domestic violence. That there was no conviction using force, fraud, or coercion in these 3 ways, and drugs. The Cassie video was off the table. The only thing he's been convicted of is taking a prostitute across state lines for the purpose of prostitution.
Can't the judge consider all of the testimony in the that was presented at the trial?
But the defense is going to say he was found not guilty on those things. So it's really kind of an interesting.
There's that, but there's another side of this. And Jamie, you've been working on this story for 5 days now to lock this down. But there was one key word, one of the sources you spoke to. You remember what that word was?
Yeah, redemption.
Yeah, because that's the other part of it.
Yeah.
That this is Diddy looking at my life after prison, because now that he knows he's not going to be locked away for decades, not going to be locked away for the rest of his life.
The moment the judge opened his mouth and the sentence was delivered, everything shifted. The music mogul, once seen as the embodiment of luxury, wild parties, and untouchable influence, was stripped down to a man cornered, shattered, and out of time. Just seconds before, the courtroom had been cloaked in a suffocating silence. Diddy sat upright, flanked by his lawyers, eyes locked on the bench, waiting. The weight of the moment pressed into every breath, every glance. Even the judge's voice carried the gravity of what was about to unfold. His decision wouldn't just mark the end of a chapter 4 Diddy, it would send tremors through an entire industry. And when the sentence dropped, slicing through the silence like a blade, Diddy didn't just react, he exploded. But to understand that eruption, you have to rewind. For months, the courtroom had been a slow-burning explosion. Each day brought another revelation. Each witness chipped away at the myth Diddy spent decades building. The man who once stood behind hip-hop legends and built Bad Boy Records wasn't just on trial, his entire empire was.
But we are hearing that he is participating in those 2 programs. To me, and by the way, for 2 reasons. One, he clearly needs help. I think we heard that from the trial. Whichever way you come out, he needs help. and that's clear. And the second reason is that he's going to be sentenced. And one of the things judges look at is, is this person rehabilitated or trying to rehabilitate themselves? So you could argue the rehabilitation should be don't hire prostitutes, because that's all he was convicted of. And so it's not so much the domestic violence and everything else, because he was never tried for that. And when it came to, using force or coercion against Cassie or Jane, he was found not guilty. So when you think about it, what is the point of drug treatment and anything else if he wasn't really found guilty of that? He was found guilty of hiring prostitutes and sending them across state lines. But optics matter. And there was testimony about his violence. So I think if he's doing this, which we're hearing he is, it's probably a good idea. Now, the second thing is the judge asked the prosecution to come up with a list of cases where the Mann Act was used, but the John was prosecuted and sent to jail. And I am hearing from some people inside this case that prosecutors may have trouble coming up with that list, because typically it's not the Johns that are prosecuted under the Mann Act. And that makes this very, very interesting in terms of sentencing. That if, he was convicted, but they can't find any other cases where the Johns face serious jail time, the defense is going to say, this is selective prosecution. You're singling out one guy and throwing the book at him when that's not the way the legal system has worked in the past. It's up to prosecutors to come up with that list, and they may not be able to. And that's going to be really interesting in October when Diddy is sentenced. Now look, he could get 10 years. That is not going to happen. He's not going to get 5 years. Even prosecutors are saying 4, but he's not going to get 4. I think he is going to get between 1 and 2 years.
The mogul, who once danced in shiny suits and toasted with the biggest celebrities on the planet, now sat at the heart of a legal firestorm that was slowly devouring his legacy. The courtroom had become a crucible of whispered rumors and damning testimonies, hidden parties behind locked doors, secret recordings, hush payments, intimidation tactics, and allegations that didn't just cross ethical lines, but hovered dangerously close to the criminal. Though he was acquitted on a few major charges, the convictions that remained were heavy enough to break anyone. Still, some believed Diddy would escape unscathed, that his power, influence, and fortune would protect him, just as they always had. But this wasn't a red carpet. This was a courtroom. And in court, there are no VIP sections, no bottle service, no velvet ropes, just hard truth, or something uncomfortably close to it, and consequences that can't be bought. As the judge delivered the sentence, it became brutally clear that, flawed as it may be, the justice system was about to do something rare: hold a celebrity accountable. The years he was handed weren't just time, they were a thunderous statement. And as the words landed, Diddy's eyes widened, his jaw tensed, and what little composure he had left crumbled under the weight of a reckoning long overdue.
A unique bail package. And you didn't tell me if it was unique. $50 million, right? You know, the idea of private security. It was an interesting argument because who would monitor him. It was interesting because the prosecution at one point had said, it's not fair, right? He's a wealthy celebrity who's providing a bail package that other people in his similar position wouldn't be able to provide. Now, the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought in our private security team and we showed him who was going to be doing it, we did Sam Bankman-Fried. So we knew that, we would be completely covered on that end. And we gave him the idea of there would be no Wi-Fi in the building that we were looking at, and that he would not be able to really be able to connect with anybody but his legal team and his family. We thought at that point that maybe we had a chance, but at the end, the judge denied it, and that's where we stood. And now on this case coming forward, after the convictions, after he wasn't convicted, at the end, we didn't know what he was going to do. So, when Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package? And by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again, even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, the judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that, it was not eligible for bail. There are certain circumstances that can be done. We're going to regroup again. I know that they were going to go talk to, Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. And, I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at NBC where he is. So, we're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Would it require him to stay in New York? Would it be him to be, I know he wanted to go back to his property in Miami, Florida. And there's also an interesting question, I think, that his defense put forward. He just got his life back. That's what they said. He wasn't convicted of the top charges. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, but he would be a fool to try to violate.
In real time, it all began to unravel. Those inside the courtroom described Diddy muttering something under his breath, low, broken, almost disbelieving. Some claimed he tried to rise from his seat as if somehow willing himself upright could undo what had just been declared. But it was too late. The gavel had fallen. The sentence was final. Court officers moved in, not to escort a music mogul, but to take an inmate into custody. That's when the eruption happened. Diddy, usually polished, precise, always in control, snapped. His voice cut through the stunned silence, lashing out at the judge, the prosecution, even his own lawyers. Witnesses said it wasn't was fear. Raw, unfiltered fear. Not just of prison, but of everything prison represented. The empire he spent decades building wasn't just falling, it was disintegrating before his eyes. Court officers rushed in to restrain him as he thrashed and resisted, while his legal team sat frozen, stunned into silence. In the gallery, family and longtime associates looked away, their heads bowed, unable to meet the moment. No one needed to speak. The expressions on their faces said everything. This was more than a verdict. This was the collapse of an era. Outside, the chaos mirrored the storm inside. Reporters scrambled for live coverage. Protesters chanted, fans argued, and critics declared that justice had finally arrived. But above the noise hung something heavier than headlines, a reckoning that had been years in the making, and a cultural turning point impossible to ignore.
As far as our sentencing date goes, and then the judge's clerk is like, oh, okay, so both parties agree, and then this matter is adjourned.
And that was it.
Yeah.
I worried that's what was going to be, because when they had the letter basically working out the date, I was like, oh, what are they going to talk about? And then after that hearing is when they switched it back to October 3rd.
Yeah.
So not much there. You didn't see Sean Combs. Okay, let's talk about some other things that have been going on. First of all, big news. There's a new lawsuit that came out against Sean Combs, okay? This is pretty disgusting. You have this unidentified John Doe who claims that in September of 2020, so relatively recently, he, Diddy, and others, they go to this warehouse out in LA that apparently contains some of the clothes of Notorious B.I.G., the rapper who was shot and killed in 1997, Sean Combs' friend. And people start taking drugs. They start wandering around this warehouse. And this John Doe claims that Combs started watching pornography on his phone, and that is when he claims, again, warning, pretty disgusting allegation, that Combs grabbed one of Biggie's t-shirts and pleasured himself with it, into it. I don't know how the best way to explain it. And even alleging that John Doe, or insisting that John Doe finish the job, so to speak. And he then claimed Combs threw the spoiled shirt onto John Doe and said, "Rip Biggie," then left. He also claimed that 15 years earlier, Combs told him to perform oral sex on him, reportedly suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, sexual battery. Don't have a ton of information, but for somebody who has been following so many of the civil lawsuits that he now faces, 67, 68, how does this fit into all of them?
Well, it seems like it's kind of showing a pattern that all the lawsuits seem to kind of allege of power, control, sexual pleasure, all of that stuff. I would say the timing of it is a little surprising given that it came after the verdict a little bit, but I think it kind of, again, goes to that pattern that a lot of the other civil suits we've seen, and these can be by just different attorneys too. It's not always the same attorney who's filing these suits, but it seems like they all kind of go to this pattern, it seems. But again, I'm just more surprised at the timing of it and when it's filed too.
To be clear, there are lawsuits that he's facing that contain allegations that were never discussed in any way in the criminal case.
Right.
But in the criminal case, was it ever alleged that he sexually assaulted men? Was it ever alleged that he grabbed men or forced them to do things, or was it mostly focused upon women?
Seems like it was mostly focused on women and that being the victims in this case. I think as far as just kind of the allegations towards men were really just having to do with the escorts or the entertainers, as they were also called in the criminal trial. But for the most part, it seemed like from what we heard in the criminal trial, which I know a lot of people are a little disappointed because they thought it would be a lot more, but really it was just kind of like just different isolated incidents involving two victims, being Jane and Cassie. But it seemed like there wasn't a lot of discussion about male victims in this trial, but there were.
For years, the rumors swirled quietly, persistently, but now there was a verdict, a sentence, and a name, permanently etched into the story of scandal, corruption, and a shattered legacy. Make no mistake, this wasn't the fallout from a single mistake or one reckless night. Diddy's downfall was the product of decades of secrets kept in the dark, power wielded without consequence, and a public image carefully manicured to mask a much darker reality. The testimonies delivered in court weren't just damaging. They were deeply unsettling. Tales of control, coercion, and in some cases, absolute terror. The people who once cheered him on, who called him mentor, partner, friend, many of them, stood in court and called him something else entirely. Abuser, manipulator, monster. And even as the sentence echoed through the legal system, the aftershocks had only just begun. Record labels began cutting ties, collaborations vanished from streaming platforms, and artists who once sang his praises went quiet. A few released vague, careful statements, severing ties without mentioning names. Because in the entertainment world, your reputation is your currency, and Diddy had become radioactive. But the most tragic part of it all, it didn't have to end this way. He had the talent, the reach, the empire. He could have been remembered as a pioneer, a mogul, a legend. Instead, power turned corrosive. It became something he wept. In the end, it consumed him. The final image that stayed with the world wasn't one of red carpets or platinum records. It was Diddy in handcuffs, no entourage, no cameras flashing in adoration, just a man stripped of myths, facing the consequences he once seemed immune to. And in that moment, hip-hop wasn't just witnessing the fall of one of its biggest stars, it was reckoning with its own reflection. Because when the applause fades, when the parties end, and the courtroom door slams shut, only one thing remains: the truth. This wasn't just a punishment. This was a cultural reckoning into history.